everyone, welcome back to Valley of Secrets. I'm your host, Nikki Ruth. This episode discusses the disappearance of a child, related family trauma, and suicide. Please take care while listening. There are stories that stay with a place, the kind you don't see written on street signs or memorials, but you feel them in the quiet, in the air that sits heavy over certain neighborhoods. In North Delta, British Columbia, one of those stories belongs to a 3-year-old girl. It's been more than 3 decades since she disappeared, but even now, people who lived there then will tell you they remember the search, the sound of police dogs, the helicopters circling above the rooftops, the neighbors calling her name until their voices cracked. Every missing child case leaves behind a shadow, but this one never faded, because she wasn't taken from a park or a street corner. She vanished from her own bed. And what happened inside to that quiet home in August 1989 has never been fully explained. Today, we'll go back to that summer, to the family, the home, and the night that changed everything. This is the story of Casey Rose Bohun. Casey Rose Bohun was born on July 18, 1986. She was small for her age, with bright eyes and red gold hair that shimmered when the light caught it. She was the kind of child who was always moving, chasing the family's Irish setter Beau through the yard, talking to birds, making up songs as she played. Neighbors remembered her sitting on the front porch steps, singing softly to herself, lost in her own little world. But like so many families, the world inside that home was more complicated than it looked from the outside. By 1989, Casey's parents were living apart. According to journalist Eve Lazarus in her Cold Case Canada podcast, Casey's father, Donald Bohun, had entered rehab in Saskatchewan, and her mother, Barbara Bohun, known to her family as Bobby Joe, had her own struggles with substance use and alcohol. She had recently moved to a small rental home on 91st Avenue in North Delta. She shared the home with her boyfriend, Jonathan David Poole, and her 2 daughters, 3-year-old Casey and 14-month-old Stacy. The move had meant to be a fresh start. It brought the family closer to Jonathan's work and his studies. He was taking education courses at Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, working weekdays for the Burnaby Parks Department, and picking up weekend shifts as a security guard at BC Place Stadium. Before moving to Delta, Barbara Bohun had spent several years living in Langley, first with her husband Donald, and later with Jonathan after the marriage ended. Eve Lazarus reports that a former neighbor, Pat Curtis, remembered Barbara from those years. She said Barbara had once been friendly, a young hairdresser who doted on the neighborhood children, but over time, her behavior grew unpredictable. Pat told Lazarus she occasionally babysat Casey, describing a little girl who often played outside alone or wandered off when no one seemed to be watching. She recalled police showing up at the house more than once when Barbara appeared to be under the influence, sometimes taking Casey away for a short time before bringing her back. Pat said she could never understand why the child was returned so quickly, but what she remembered most was how frequently Barbara seemed to disappear, leaving Casey to drift between neighbors who tried to help. Those years in Langley painted a complicated picture, one of affection and chaos tangled together, foreshadowing the heartbreak that would follow. Saturday, August 5th, 1989, began like any other midsummer weekend in the Fraser Valley. Bright, still, and heavy with the warmth of August air. By midday, the temperature had crept into the mid-20s, not scorching, just the kind of gentle heat that made the grass soft underneath bare feet. The smell of cedar drifted in from the surrounding trees, and every so often a light breeze carried the distant hum of lawnmowers and children's laughter. Barbara and the girls had gone to Maple Ridge to celebrate birthdays at Barb's mother Kathy's home. Kathy remembered it as one of those simple, perfect afternoons. The backyard filled with the sound of cousins laughing, burgers sizzling on the barbecue, and sunlight glinting off those paper plates. Casey had just turned 3, and her cousin Dominique was about the same age. The two raced barefoot through the grass, popsicle juice running down their wrists, the air sticky with that sweet mix of sugar and summer. For a few hours, life felt normal, safe, ordinary, full of plans that would stretch beyond that weekend. As the sun began to dip behind the evergreens, the light turned that deep honey gold that only August evenings know. By the time they said goodbye, the sky over Maple Ridge had cooled into pale lavender, and a thin veil of mist was already gathering along the river. At around 10 p.m., Barbara's sister Beverly offered to drive her, Casey, and baby Stacy home. It was about 11 o'clock by the time they pulled into the driveway of the new house in North Delta. Barbara had only lived there for about a month, and Beverly wanted to see where her sister had settled. Eve Lazarus reports that both little girls were fast asleep in the car. Stacy, just a baby, and Casey, wearing her pink pajamas from earlier that evening. Barbara gently lifted Stacy from the car seat, while her sister Beverly carried Casey inside and tucked her into bed. Beverly smoothed the blanket over her and whispered goodnight before leaving the room. According to Eve Lazarus, Jonathan hadn't gone to the family barbecue that day. He told Barbara and her sister Beverly that he'd spent the evening running errands, crossing the U.S. border to pick up milk and cheese. He made tea for the two sisters, chatting easily as they stood in the kitchen for a while, before Beverly decided it was time to drive the hour back home. Since Beverly wasn't familiar with the area, Jonathan offered to guide her back toward the Alex Fraser Bridge. He climbed into his blue Firebird, told her to follow close behind, and together they drove through the quiet Delta streets until the bridge's lights appeared ahead. Once she was safely on her route home, he turned back. Back at the house, Barbara took 2 Tylenol for a headache, turned on the television, and stretched out on the couch. Within minutes, she was fast asleep, the faint glow of TV flickering across the room. And sometime between that moment and dawn, something happened that would shatter everything. Around 10 o'clock the following morning, according to reports from the province, 2 of Jonathan's friends, Christopher Carew and his wife Karen, had come by to see the new place and talk about helping with the new fence for the backyard. They found Jonathan in the backyard filling a small plastic wading pool with water, the kind a toddler would splash around in on a warm summer day. He told them that Casey would love it. According to Lazarus, Barbara welcomed them in and suggested they throw a few things on the grill for lunch. As they chatted in the kitchen, Karen asked where little Casey was, and Barbara told her she was still asleep. Karen asked if it would be okay if she went to peek in on her, and when they stepped into the girl's bedroom, Casey's bed was empty. Worried, the adults searched the house from end to end, checking closets, the bathroom, under the couch cushions, even the crawl space, calling her name as they moved from room to room. But the house was silent. That's when panic took over. Lazarus reports that when they realized the 3-year-old was nowhere to be found, Barbara called police. The call came in at 12:06 p.m., answered by Constable Peggy Adams and her partner with the Delta Police Department. Within minutes, patrol cars were outside the small rental home on 91st Avenue, officers unaware that they had just stepped into what would become one of British Columbia's most enduring mysteries. The quiet street of 91st Avenue, lined with modest homes and clipped lawns, was quickly replaced with police cars, curious neighbors, and family members drifting between shock and disbelief. Detectives moved through the home carefully, room by room, looking for anything that might explain how a 3-year-old girl could vanish in the middle of the night. According to cold case explorations, there were no broken windows, no signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, and no trace of a struggle. The front door was found slightly ajar, though whether it had been left open or pushed that way later, no one could say for certain, especially since people were coming and going throughout that morning. Barbara told police she'd last seen Casey around 6 o'clock that morning, still asleep beside baby Stacy in their shared bedroom. She said she'd covered her daughter with a blanket, changed Stacy's diaper, and then gone back to the sofa to rest. That account would become one of several that morning, because a neighbor told police she thought she'd seen a small red-headed girl sitting on the front steps of the Bohun home at around 7:30 that morning, singing softly to herself in the sunshine, as reported in the province. At the time, it hadn't seemed strange, just a little girl enjoying the morning air. But after Casey was missing, the memory took an eerie kind of weight. By afternoon, the street outside the Bohun house had become a blur of activity. Camera crews, patrol cars, reporters, and locals standing silently on their lawns, hoping for a glimpse of something that made sense. According to the province, Barbara stood in the yard, eyes red and swollen from crying. She faced the cameras and pleaded for help, her voice shaking, words tumbling out between sobs. She begged whoever might have her daughter to please bring her home. Inside, Jonathan tried to keep calm. He told reporters that Casey had always been curious and adventurous, the kind of little girl who turned everything into a game. He said she had a habit of hiding in what he called, quote-unquote, cubbyholes, small spaces like closets, cupboards, and behind furniture. Sometimes, he said, it took them hours to find her. At first, police held on to that hope, that Casey had hidden herself away somewhere nearby, waiting to be found. But as the hours dragged on, the reality grew heavier. And by that evening, detectives were forced to admit what no one wanted to say out loud. This was no longer just a game of hide and seek. Something else had happened inside that house on 91st Avenue. For 3 long days, the quiet streets of North Delta filled with people calling out Casey's name as they searched every area. Police officers, search and rescue teams, and hundreds of local volunteers combed every inch of that neighborhood. Yards, ditches, trails, creeks, sheds, garages, hoping for a sign of the missing 3-year-old child. Helicopters circled overhead, and search dogs were brought in. Door-to-door checks were carried out by officers and civilians alike. It became one of the largest missing child searches Delta has ever seen at that time. But by the 3rd day, there was still nothing. And according to the province, police said they had, quote, exhausted every immediate lead, end quote. With no physical evidence and no sign of Casey anywhere, they had no choice but to scale back the ground search. The sight of the officers packing up their maps and radios left a kind of hollow quiet behind, the kind of silence that settles in when hope starts to thin. That's when investigators shifted focus. The case was no longer a rescue effort. It was now a missing persons investigation. With the ground search scaled back and no physical trace of Casey anywhere, investigators turned their attention to those who knew her best. It's what they always do first, look closest to home. Barbara and Jonathan were questioned separately and repeatedly at the Delta Police Detachment. Detectives asked them to retrace the night step by step. When did they arrive home? Who locked the doors? when was the last time either of them saw Casey? According to the province, both were asked to take polygraph tests, the lie detector examinations commonly used by police at the time. A police specialist initially administered the test to 4 adults connected to the case: Jonathan, Barbara's sister Beverly, Casey's biological father Donald, and Donald's father. After administering the tests, police confirmed that Donald and Donald's father had been cleared. Both men were ruled out as having any involvement. Donald at the time was living in Saskatchewan, and his father's polygraph test showed no deception. According to Eve Lazarus, Beverly told her that she also had passed the polygraph twice, and that police had told her that Jonathan had not. Although Jonathan's test results were never made known publicly. Barbara's test ended up being delayed, as she found out she was pregnant with her 3rd daughter, Shona, and doctors advised against it until the baby was born. When she finally did take the test the following year, she told reporters that she had passed, although that was never confirmed by police. As weeks turned into months, investigators began to notice something unsettling. The story of what happened that night kept changing. Barbara's first statement to police, taken the morning Casey disappeared, was simple and consistent. She said she checked on her daughters around 6 a.m., found Casey asleep beside baby Stacy, pulled the blanket up over her, changed Stacy's diaper, and went back to the sofa. That version was recorded in official notes and reported by the province just days after the disappearance. But later versions told a different story. To her friend Carmen Campbell, Barbara described something else, that she'd been awakened around 5 a.m. by Casey crying. She thought her daughter was having a nightmare, so Barbara said she went in, calmed her down, looked around the room, and saw nothing unusual, so she went back to bed. In another retelling, Barbara said she'd woken up later that morning to find the front door slightly open, something she had never mentioned in her original statement. And by 1991, during taped interviews with the Missing Children Society of Canada, her story changed again. This time, she spoke about masked intruders, 1 or possibly 3, who she believed had broken into the home and taken Casey. That detail had never been part of the police statements. According to investigator Rhonda Morgan, who spent more than 17 years working on missing children's cases, stated, quote, "Barbara Bohun's story changed numerous times. Sometimes there was 1 intruder, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. And each time the details were different," end quote. Detectives could never corroborate the story of intruders, nor find evidence that anyone had forced entry into the house. No fingerprints, no footprints, no signs of a break-in. Still, they couldn't dismiss her pain. Barbara was frantic, exhausted, and by all accounts barely holding on. Friends described her as a woman haunted by guilt, yet determined to believe her daughter was alive somewhere. One said she would replay the events of that night over and over, asking, "What if I'd stayed awake? What if I'd heard something?" But as the contradictions grew, so did the public's doubt. To some, Barbara was a grieving mother trying to make sense of trauma. To others, her changing story sounded like secrets. And once those suspicions began, they never really went away. In 1993, nearly 4 years after Casey disappeared, a Delta police detective was combing through stacks of old missing child reports when one file caught his attention. A tip that had been quietly filed away and missed. According to the province, it was dated in September 1989, just weeks after Casey vanished. A woman from Kamloops had contacted police saying she'd seen a small red-headed girl who looked strikingly like Casey, not just once, but on several occasions, playing at a neighborhood playground with a man and a woman. Her report had been one of more than 400 tips police received that fall, and somehow this one slipped through the cracks. It sat untouched for nearly 4 years. Now, in 1993, detectives tracked that woman down and interviewed her again. And this time, she remembered more. She told investigators the little girl had spoken to her that day and said that her name was quote-unquote Casey Rose Bohun, and that she didn't like her quote-unquote new mom, and that she wanted to go home to her quote-unquote real mom. The province reported that those details had not appeared in her original statement, but still, police took it seriously. Officers circulated an age-progressed photo showing what a 7-year-old Casey might look like all across BC, but focusing their efforts in Kamloops and Kelowna, where similar tips had come in over the years. By then, Casey's father, Donald Bohun, and his parents were living in Kelowna, making their reports feel even closer to home. Each new sighting brought a flicker of hope, and each one, eventually, went quiet. For Barbara, that was enough to keep believing that somewhere, somehow, her daughter might still be out there waiting to come home. After the headlines faded and the news crews packed up, Barbara tried to keep going. The family moved out of the Delta house and in with her mother Kathy in Maple Ridge for a time. Friends said that she was doing her best. She was working part-time, attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and trying to stay sober while caring for her 2 little girls. She joined a local support group called Victims of Violence, surrounding herself with others who understood grief, even if no one could fully understand hers. But she carried the weight of suspicion everywhere she went. Whispers followed her that her story didn't add up and that she knew more than she was saying. Those close to her insisted she loved her daughters fiercely. She talked about wanting stability, a home, a future, and something normal. She'd been through years of volatility with her ex-husband Donald before leaving that marriage. And now, Barbara and Jonathan's relationship began to fracture under the pressure. In 1995, Jonathan left Canada to teach English in South Korea. According to Eve Lazarus, they continued a long-distance relationship, with Jonathan visiting about once a year. Their youngest daughter, Shona, who was 11 at the time, eventually went to live overseas with Jonathan after social workers intervened. Both she and Casey's older sister, 12-year-old Stacy, had been apprehended and placed in foster care when concerns were raised about discipline and stability in the home. Stacy was placed in the care of musician Tim Bachman, a former member of a Canadian rock band, Bachman Turner Overdrive. Years later, Stacy came forward alleging that Bachman had sexually assaulted her while she was living in his foster home. According to court records and reporting by the Vancouver Sun, Bachman was charged but ultimately acquitted. In his 2016 ruling, Justice Neil Brown determined that Stacy's testimony, while sincere, was too inconsistent to support a criminal conviction. The decision was devastating for Stacy, who had already endured so much loss. First her sister, then her home, and now a system that once again seemed to be unable to protect her. By 2001, nearly 12 years after Casey vanished, Barbara's life had narrowed into routine. She was living alone in a small basement suite in Port Coquitlam, working shifts at a donut shop. Jonathan was still overseas, and all of her daughters were gone. No one could have predicted what would happen next. It was a quiet Sunday morning in April 2001. The sky hung low and gray over the Fraser River, the kind of morning where even the air feels tired. Just before 7:30 a.m., a man fishing near the Botello Bridge saw something fall from above. He called 911, saying he'd heard a splash, a large one, and then nothing but the sound of water closing back over itself. Police and rescue crews launched a tugboat and followed the current downstream. Roughly 400 meters from the bridge, they found a woman's body in the river. When fingerprints came back, the name stunned everyone involved. It was Barbara Bohun, and she was 40 years old. The same woman who had once pleaded on television for the return of her 3-year-old daughter had now taken her life. According to reports in the province, Barbara had finished her overnight shift at a Coquitlam donut shop the evening before. After work, she stopped by the Golden Years pub for a few rounds of pool and then began the long walk through the night toward the bridge. Several motorists later told police they'd seen her sitting on the railing, legs swinging into the open air, before she leaned forward and fell. At the time of her death, Barbara had been renting the basement suite beneath her friend Leslie Gallagher. She'd been sober for more than a decade, attending AA, and friends said trying hard to stay quote-unquote high on life. Leslie remembered that just weeks earlier, Barbara had seemed happy, playful even. They'd spent a sunny afternoon in Stanley Park, dressing the mermaid statue in a bra and shorts, calling every newspaper in town to come take a picture. It had been a moment of pure laughter, a rare one. But underneath, something in Barbara had never healed. She had lost her daughter, her partner, and eventually both of her remaining children. Every birthday that passed without answers carved the wound a little deeper. According to the province, when her family gathered after her death, her sister Heather found 2 small notes among her things, one for Stacy and one for Shona. Each had a simple drawing and the words, quote-unquote, I love you. There wasn't one for Casey. If you or someone you know is struggling, please know that you are not alone. Help is available. In Canada, you can call or text 988, the Suicide Crisis Helpline, for free 24/7 confidential support. And if you're listening outside Canada, visit findahelpline.com to locate services in your area. Police reopened Casey's case in the wake of Barbara's death, hoping that revisiting the old evidence might reveal something they'd missed. They searched her belongings for suicide notes or any written confessions, anything that might shed light on what happened to Casey, but they found nothing. Barbara's death reignited the question that haunted Delta police for more than a decade. Was she a mother broken by grief, or a woman who had been carrying a secret too heavy to live with? More than 30 years have passed since 3-year-old Casey Bohun vanished from her bed on that warm August night in 1989. Her case remains one of BC's longest-standing mysteries, one that still divides opinion and tugs at the heart of anyone who's ever looked into it. Over the years, several theories have surfaced. Some feel more plausible than others, but each one tells something about how people try to make sense of the unthinkable. The simplest explanation, and the one investigators first considered, was that Casey had just wandered away from home. She was curious, energetic, and loved exploring small spaces. It's possible she woke early, slipped outside, and got lost in the unfamiliar neighborhood. But search teams, dozens of officers, and hundreds of volunteers combed the area for 3 days using dogs, helicopters, and door-to-door canvassing. If she had wandered away, some trace of her should have been found. A toy, a piece of clothing, a footprint, but nothing ever was. Another theory points to the possibility of a stranger abduction. Barbara herself said early on that she believed someone must have entered the home and taken her daughter. But there were no signs of forced entry. Stranger abductions are extremely rare in Canada. Only a handful are recorded nationwide each year, according to the Canadian Centre for Child Protection and Statistics Canada. But it's not impossible. Some investigators speculated Casey could have been taken by someone passing through the area. There's also a quieter theory that someone who knew of Barbara's struggles might have taken Casey to protect her. A neighbor, a family acquaintance, or even a stranger who believed the child was in danger in her home. It's been suggested that Casey could have been taken and raised under a new name, never knowing who she really was. For Barbara, this was the hope she held on to, the belief that somewhere out there her little girl was still alive and being loved by a new family. And then there's the hardest theory of all, that Casey's disappearance wasn't an accident or a kidnapping. but something that happened inside the house. Investigators have long called Jonathan a person of interest. Delta Police told reporters, quote, "We believe he has not given us all the information he has. Information that could help us find out what happened to Casey," end quote. Jonathan has never been charged and has refused all interviews since his initial statements. He left Canada for South Korea years ago and has remained out of the public eye. As for Barbara, some believed her guilt and pain were evidence of something she couldn't bring herself to admit. Others, including friends and family, say the suspicion destroyed her, that she was a mother grieving a loss too heavy to carry. There was no forensic evidence in the home, no blood, no proof of violence, just the empty space where little girl once slept. To this day, the disappearance of Casey Rose Bohun remains unsolved. Her case file still sits in the archives of the Delta Police Department, a collection of faded reports, taped interviews, and photographs of a bright-eyed little girl with sunlit hair. The case remains active until they find her. At this time, there's no closure, no conviction, and no clear truth. Only questions that have stretched across generations. But sometimes, all it takes is one memory, one confession, one person who decides to come forward to finally bring a child home. Maybe that person is still out there. Maybe Casey herself is. If you know anything about the disappearance of Casey Rose Bohun, please contact the Delta Police Department at 604-946-4411. Or if you want to remain anonymous, you can call Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. Every lead, no matter how small, could make a difference. Thank you for listening to Valley of Secrets and for all of your support. If you enjoy this podcast and want to keep the show going, you can follow along on Instagram or Facebook at Valley of Secrets Podcast. Share these episodes with family and friends, or you can make a small monthly donation through the link in the episode notes under the source information. Any support is appreciated. Every listen, every follow, and every share helps keep these voices and their memories alive. I'll see you all next week. Until then, stay aware, stay safe, and stay curious.